Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. Today's episode is a tournament after action report. That's right, it's time for some more dispatches from the front lines. And oh boy, do I have a sweaty meatball for your viewing pleasure today. You see, I went to a competitive event and I put my best foot forward. No meme list here, sir. No. We went whacker, we went try hard, and I actually tried to put together a good list and do as well as possible. Tank commanders, Aquilans, you name it, I had it. And so without further ado, let's mount up, roll out, and drive right into today's meta chasing episode. Good news, everyone! Bolt Action 3rd edition is just around the corner. And the best way that you can prepare for this new and exciting edition of one of my favourite games of all time is by getting yourself some new Bolt Action miniatures. But where can you get these models? Well, don't worry, I've got you covered. There's an affiliate link down in the description below that'll take you straight to the Warlord Games website and you can get your World War II miniature fix right from the source. By using the affiliate link down in the description below, not only will you be getting some awesome models, but you will also be supporting the channel. A massive thank you to Warlord Games for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back into the action. As is tradition, I want to start off with a few thank yous. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you to the tournament organisers, Team Stonehammer. These guys always put on a great event. I've been to a few of their tournaments and they're always just really well run. I also want to say a big thank you to the venue for the tournament, Element Games. You guys know them. You guys love them. Element Games is a fantastic venue. If you're ever looking to play casual or competitive games, I highly recommend them. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a big thank you to all of my opponents. Warhammer is a sociable game. It involves getting on with the person on the other side of the table. And often what makes a good or bad event is the people that you get to play against. And I was fortunate enough to play 3 fantastic people who were a genuine pleasure to play against. I also want to do a shout out to my Game 2 opponent, Aidan Smalley, who is a fantastic Death Guard player and actually has his own YouTube channel, the Disgustingly Resilient Podcast. So make sure you go and check that out. But with that said, now let's get into the video proper and we'll start with the list overview. As per usual, I have made a separate video deep diving and getting into the nitty-gritty of my list. And I'll make sure there's a link to that video down in the description below for those of you that really want to marinate in the details. But of course, I will do a quick summary of the list now. The thoughts going through my head with this list was I want to lead into some of the new things that are good for guard, like tank commanders and Aquilans, whilst also sticking with what is tried and tested as effective units and strategies. So this is an updated mechanized guard army. I'm a big believer in mech guard. I think it is possibly the strongest way of running the army at the moment because you get lots of vehicles, which are good in 10th edition, and you still manage to get a lot of objective control, secondary game, and all of that good stuff. With those principles, those tenets in mind, my list consisted of 3 tank commanders, every single one equipped with a Demarcher cannon, a las cannon, and plasma cannons. I went for plasma cannons over multi-melters because I was worried about the short range of the demolishers, so I wanted some longer range weapons so that my tank commanders weren't always out of range of stuff. One of the tank commanders was upgraded to have Grand Strategist as well. This is because I had an extra tank that would benefit from an order, and that was a Rogel Dawn. The Rogel Dawn had the Pulverizer Cannon, the Oppressor Cannon with autocannon, it had heavy bolters, and it had heavy stubbers. I also had a Tech Priest Engine Seer supporting the Rogel Dawn, so it could give it a 4+ invulnerable save. That covers the big boom of the list, but of course we cannot forget the Infantry Corps. Every day in the Corps is a day on the farm. Every meal a banquet, every paycheck a fortune, every formation a parade. I love the Corps. My infantry corps today consisted of 5 units of Catachan jungle fighters with double flamer inside of 5 chimeras. The chimeras had double heavy bolter, heavy stubber, lasgun arrays, and of course a hunter killer missile. I love the scout mirrors, the fact that the Catachans give the scout to the chimeras so that they can get forward quickly. You can use that scout both defensively and also offensively. They're just really, really solid units, and it gives me a lot of objective control. And you guys know I love my objective control. We've also got a couple of other infantry units in the army. We've got a big giga blob of scions. These guys not only provide me with more bodies, but also provide me with some pseudo indirect fire and just some great anti-infantry capability for just clearing off objectives. My Scion Giga Blob consisted of a 10-man Scion squad, double plasma, double melter, sergeant with plasma pistol and power fist, and then there was a Scion command squad which had a plasma pistol on the Scion commander, a melter gun, a plasma gun, a grenade launcher, and then I went for a regular dude with a regimental standard. Normally I go for the medic, but I've not really been feeling the 6-up feel no pain. Most of the time it doesn't really help, so I went for the regimental standard because, again, it helped me get more objective control. The last infantry choice in the army was 10 Tempestus Aquilans. These are so hot right now, and it's not surprising that they're featuring in this list. A lot of people are saying put 30 of them in your list straight away. I've tried 30 and they were good, but I didn't want to take away from some of my other infantry choices or from my firepower, so I just put the one squad in there so that I could do some secondary objectives. My Aquilans were equipped with a sentry flamer. I've tried the grenade launcher, I prefer the flamer now, and also I had a plasma carbine and I had a sniper rifle. Everyone else had rifles. The last unit of the army was a basilisk. You can't go wrong with a good basilisk. It's some proper indirect fire. It's great for harassing those small units that want to hide out of line of sight. It's just a straight up marine killer as well, just picking off those intercessors and intercessor equivalents. And the big thing, of course, is it slows the enemy down with its earth shaker shells. I also wanted a unit that didn't mind us sitting on my home objective and just blasting away. And I wanted something that would be good against enemy Aquilans. Because if I have like a crappy little 5-man squad or just like Creed just sitting on my home objective, well, the Aquilans could probably clear that out. But if I've got a Basilisk, it's much less likely that they're going to be able to clear the Basilisk out and take my home objective away from me. In total, the list has 10 vehicles and it has 76 infantry, including the engines here. And of course, I can use reinforcements on one of the squads, getting me up to 86 bodies in total in a game. That just about covers the list. Now let's move on to the lay of the land. So what was this event all about? What was the format? How competitive was it? And what was the terrain like? To answer the first question, it was a 2-day, 5-round GT with approximately 40 players in attendance. Now, unfortunately for me, I wasn't able to attend the second day, so I'm really treating this as more of a big RTT. As for the competitiveness of the event, I would say that this was pretty competitive. There were some very good players at the event, and the spread of the factions was really interesting. There was a buttload of Death Guard, and for my money, I think they are the new meta inheritors, but there was also a surprisingly large amount of Tyranid players there as well. Every faction was represented, but those were definitely the most represented. The terrain was Glasshammer terrain. For those of you that aren't familiar with Glasshammer terrain, it's somewhat similar to UKTC, although they take out 1 or 2 of the ruins and they replace them with some forests instead. I think that it makes the boards slightly less dense, whilst also making sure that the lethality of the game doesn't spiral out of control. Essentially, either every unit you've got will be able to hide out of line of sight behind a big L-shaped ruin, or it's going to have the benefit of cover. Speaking of Glasshammer, they actually have their own YouTube channel, and they were actually at the event and they were streaming the games. So I was lucky enough to get on the top table and do a streamed game, and so I want to say a big thank you to the Glasshammer team for giving me that opportunity. But that's enough pre-game preamble, if you will. I know why you guys are here. You want to know how all the different battles went. So without further ado, let's get into the games. Game number 1, and I find myself in a battle to the death against Chaos Space Marines led by their warlord, Simon. And I don't mean to alarm you, but this might have been the coolest Chaos Space Marine army I have ever played against. Not only were the models painted in an eclectic yet high quality fashion, but also it was a very themed army. It was all demon engines all the way. The detachment was Soulforged Warpack. In the list we have Vashtor the Archonfane. There's also 1, 2, 3 Warpsmiths. We've then got a unit of 10 cultists, 2 units of Raptors, and a unit of Traitor Guardsmen. Then we've also got 2 units of Chaos Bikers, and we then get into the Demon Engines themselves with double Forge Fiend, double Mauler Fiend, scratch that, triple Mauler Fiend, and triple Venom Crawler. That is a lot of vehicles, but there's also plenty of secondary and primary game in there with the cultists and the bikers and the raptors and all of that good stuff. As for the mission, we were doing Terraform, which I actually quite liked Terraform as a mission. I didn't like the look of it on paper, but I enjoyed playing it. And then deployment was Search and Destroy, and the twist, the mission rule, was Stalwarts. Speaking of deployment, I threw my forces down into 3 distinct formations. On the left flank, we had 2 Chimeras and a Lemur's Tank Commander. In the middle, we had a Chimera, a Rogol Dawn, and the Tank Commander with Grand Strategist. And on the right flank, we had 2 Chimeras and a Tank Commander. I found this to be quite an effective formation. Just having the double Chimera and the Tank Commanders meant that I had plenty of armored might wherever I needed it, plenty of firepower, plenty of objective control as well. And it was all mobile enough where if the left flank needed a bit of help, we could break left, and if the right flank needed a bit of help, we could break right. The Basilisk, it stayed on the home objective, doing home objective things. As for the chaotic demon engines, they had a Venom Crawler, both Forge Fiends and Vashtor on the guard's left flank. In the middle, they had 2 Mauler Fiends, and on the guard's right flank, they had a Mauler Fiend, a Venom Crawler, and a squad of bikers. There was also a squad of bikers that were in the middle as well. Everything else for both sides was in reserve, and so there was only one thing to do: find out who was going to get that first turn. Both sides wanted to go second, because both sides had quite effectively hidden a lot of their forces behind the L-shaped ruins. So naturally, I did win the first roll-off. Goddamn Skinwalker Mordian, he always gets that first turn roll-off whenever I don't want it. To be honest, my first turn was really quick. On the right flank, I pushed forward a Chimera as far forward as it could go between the scout move and the regular move, and I got it onto the objective on the far right. I also moved one of my tank commanders round that way, but not quite as far. Its Martial Cannon wouldn't be in range this turn, but it could still lay down some firepower with those plasma cannons and the las cannon. My other Chimera on the right flank just staged itself effectively behind a big L-shaped ruin, so that if it needed to jump its men onto the middle objective or onto the right-hand objective, it could do that easily. Speaking of the mid, my Demolisher Cannon tank pushed forward as far as it could. The Rogol Dawn stayed behind it, laying down the firepower from further away. I used the 4% vulnerable save onto the tank commander to try and make it a little bit more likely to survive, considering I know that it was a bit of a risk putting it that far forward. On the left flank, tank commander came round, started covering that firing lane, and both Chimeras pushed forward, one of which was successfully able to get onto the top left objective. For my shooting in turn 1, there really wasn't a huge amount to do because most of the enemy units were hidden, but I was able to destroy the unit of bikers in the middle of the board, and I was also able to take one of the other bike squads and bring it down to just one guy, essentially removing a lot of my opponent's early fast movers from the game from the get-go. I wanted to try and keep him at arm's length for as long as possible. Sadly, that was going to be easier said than done, because my opponent went pretty balls to the wall in his turn. First thing he did is he took Vashtor and he used a stratagem that allowed him to move through walls, and he sent him right towards my Demolisher Cannon tank in the middle of the board. I actually overwatched here, which was a bit of a mistake because Vashdor makes all of your weapons hazardous. And so I ended up doing quite a lot of wounds to myself on those hazardous rolls. And all I managed to do was a couple of wounds to Vashdor. My opponent also pushed forward with the Venom Crawler and the lone remaining biker on the right flank and was able to shoot and charge the Chimera on that objective, but Chimeras are surprisingly durable, and between my opponent rolling a little cold and me rolling a little hot, my Chimera was able to survive, no problem. As for the left flank, one of the Venom Crawlers came forward and started laying some firepower into my tank commander, and so did one of the Forge Fiends. I was fortunate enough where my tank commander did survive, but I did take a fair few wounds. Also, Raptors came barreling out of my opponent's deployment zone, and they were able to charge into the Chimera that had got onto the top left objective. They didn't destroy it, but they did have more objective control than I did. Speaking of charges, Vashdor went into my tank commander and was able to just destroy him. Interestingly, if I hadn't overwatched, I had overestimated what Vashdor could do, and I thought, well, I might as well overwatch because I'm going to die anyway. I think if I hadn't overwatched, I might have actually been able to survive Vashdor's onslaught because my opponent didn't roll that well with him. He just rolled kind of okay. And I think my tank commander might have lived on like a wound or 4. But as it was, I died and then I couldn't death fitting an officer anyway because I was stuck in combat. So my opponent's turn 1 had been pretty effective. He'd locked down 2 of my Chimeras, badly damaged both of them, and he had badly damaged one of my tank commanders and destroyed another one. But you guys know the old saying, the guard gets hit hard, but we hit back even harder. My turn 2 was a brutal display of Imperial firepower. Over on the right flank, I successfully destroy the Chaos Biker that is in combat with the Chimera simply by just shooting my way out. I fire heavy bolters, I fire heavy stubbers, lasgun arrays, and eventually it comes down to the 2 flame troopers sticking out the top of the firing deck, but we do manage to kill that biker. Then my tank commander that was over there actually comes back towards the middle, and I draw a line of sight to Vashdor with him, and I've also got the Rogel Dawn, which is right in Vashdor's face. I blast away with the tank commander first, and I get a little lucky on the number of 6s for my lethals and for my number of shots. And amazingly, one tank commander was able to blow away Vashdor. I think I did have to use a CP on a damage roll on Demolisher. It rolled like a 1, and then I re-rolled it and got like a 4 or a 5. But one tank commander did kill the Archonfane fairly easily. This did free up the Rogel Dawn, who did some longer range firepower, weakening one of the Forge Fiends significantly. Over on the left flank, my Chimera that had been tied up by the Raptors, the guys inside it got out first, then the Chimera fell back. That meant that the guys inside could still shoot. And between them and the other Chimera on the left flank, we were able to clear out those Raptors without much of a problem. Also, the tank commander over there stayed still because it didn't want to risk getting overwatched, and it was able to destroy the Venom Crawler that was on the left flank as well. So we have just picked up all of the bikers so far. We've picked up Vashdor, we've picked up one of the Raptor squads, and we've damaged one of the Forge Fiends, and we've picked up another Venom Crawler as well. So we are picking up these war machines pretty quickly. But the Chaos Forces are down, but they are not out, and they go for a big surge this turn. All of the Chaos Reserves came in this turn. The Raptors came in on the right flank, the 3rd Venom Crawler and the Chaos Guardsman, the Traitor Guardsman, came in on the left flank. We also had one of the Mauler Fiends merge through one of the walls using a stratagem, and that was barreling down the middle. But I had anticipated this, and I'd move blocked it with a squad of Guardsmen. So it was going to munch on some Guardsmen this turn, but that was about it. In the Chaos turn, they charge my Chimera on the right flank with the Venom Crawler and the Raptors, and between those units they are able to shoot and chop my Chimera to death. The Guardsmen inside spill out, and they end up getting tagged by the Venom Crawler and by the Raptors. In the middle, the Mauler Fiend munches on the Guardsman, and the Forge Fiend that's supporting it does do a bit of firepower into my Rogue All Dawn and actually does some significant damage to it, but between the 4+ invulnerable save and the blank, I am able to weather that storm and not become degraded. But the left flank is where things seem to be really hot. Venom Crawler makes a charge from reserve and is able to get into the guards from which it disembarked from the Chimera to deal with the Raptors last turn and basically kills them down to like 2 guys. And then the remaining firepower on that side from the Forge Fiend goes into my tank commander and brings him down to just 2 wounds. Woo-hoo-hoo, baby! It was very close, and I did actually need to use a CP reroll on my save. Otherwise, my tank commander would have died, and my opponent had been very clever and had kept the Forge Fiend 25 inches away. So even if I got death fitting an officer off, I wouldn't have been able to get revenge on that Forge Fiend. So by the end of round 2, both sides had been delivering haymakers to each other. We'd been destroying each other's units, and a lot of the other assets on both sides had at least taken some wounds. Unfortunately for the Chaos Boys, round 3 is where the Guard sealed the deal. You see, the big problem with the Soulforged Warpack is it kind of shakes itself to death. You take a lot of mortal wounds when you fail your dark packs, and I think you even take more than the usual amount because of just the way that the Soulforged Warpack works. And on top of this, the Demon Engines tend to have like Leadership 7 rather than like Leadership 6, so they end up failing the dark packs more often. And so while some of my vehicles were kind of badly damaged, nearly every single one of the remaining Demon Engines was really shaky. I mean, both Forge Fiends were on like 4 wounds, and even the Mauler Fiend had taken a couple of failed dark packs and taken a few mortal wounds as well. So when it came over to my turn 3, I just picked up pretty much every Demon Engine in the room. I took out both Venom Crawlers, I took out both Forge Fiends, and I was also able take out the Mauler Fiend that had come charging into the center. And to give you an idea of how wild this was, one of the Forge Fiends went down through a Chimera just because I was able to get enough lethal hits on it, and it's only got a 3-up save. One of those heavy bolter rounds snuck through, took it down from 4 wounds to 2, and then between the Stubber, the Lasguns, and a Hunter Killer Missile, we were able to chip off the other remaining 2 wounds. That is a really good demonstration of how Chimeras can punch above their weight and how you shouldn't dismiss their firepower. Because of this, going into my opponent's turn 3, the only real meaningful thing that happened was the final last Mauler Fiend charged through a wall and was able to get into contact with my Rogue All Dawn, who was able to tank the damage. And there was also like a charge here and there from like a Warp Smith and a remnant unit of Raptors, but it was the last hurrah. And by the end of Guard turn 4, the Chaos Forces had been completely tabled. As a result, the final score for Game 1 was 82 points to his Imperial Guard and 32 points to the Demon Engines, meaning a solid victory for the forces of the Imperium. I would say the main lesson learned from this game is Guard firepower is very potent, and I really felt my lethal hits coming into effect when I was fighting against an army that was majority vehicles. When I cast my mind back and compare this game to some of the games I had at the previous GT, when I was using my Scions, it was like night and day. My Scions almost never had lethal hits, but my Met Guard nearly always had lethal hits. I think that goes to show what direction the meta is in at the moment. A lot of people are leaning heavily into vehicles in one capacity or another. And I can tell you, as we go through the rest of the games, I felt like I had lethal hits as and when I needed them in every single game. It wasn't just this one. But with one victory under the belt, it was time to go into game number 2. Game number 2, and I am facing Aiden and his Death Guard. Now, for those of you who don't know, Aiden knows a thing or two about the Smelly Boys. In fact, at the time of recording, he is the #1 ranked Death Guard player, not just in the UK, but in the entire world. He has stuck with them through thick and thin, and he is, safe to say, an expert in the faction. In fact, he has his own YouTube channel, which he runs with a couple of other blokes, called the Disgustingly Resilient Podcast. And I'll make sure there's a link to that channel down in the description below. So if you want to learn how to be a better Death Guard player, make sure you check that out. And furthermore, what made this game extra special is we got to do it on live stream, because David from the Glasshammer team was there at the tournament. He was there with the tournament organizers, and it was all arranged that we could play our game live, which is always really, really fun. And what's even more awesome is I spoke to Dave from Glasshammer on the day, and he said that we could use the footage from the game as a battle report on this channel. So as an extra special treat, once you've watched this video, you will be able to see that game live and in action, and there'll be a link to the Glasshammer channel in there as well, so you can go and support them, because a big thank you to them for letting us to use that footage. If you're watching this video on the day that it comes out, the battle report will be coming out tomorrow. If you're watching this after this video's been out a few days, then that battle report will already be live and available for your viewing pleasure. But what I want to do now is go through the game from my perspective, so you get some behind the scenes thoughts on what was happening, where I think things went right, where I think things went wrong, and just to add that little bit extra perspective. Let's begin with Aiden's list. He had 2 Death Guard sorcerers in Terminator armor, and he had a Lord of Contagion, and Mortarion, and Typhus. There were 2 units of Death Guard cultists, 3 Death Guard Predator Destructors, those have got the autocannon turrets, and then he had Lads Cannons for the sponsons, and then there were 3 units of Death Shroud Terminators. 2 of them max strength, 6 men in each, 1 of them a little bit smaller with just 3 blokes in there. And then we had 2 fetid bloat drones and a big blob of 20 poxwalkers and 2 units of Nurglings allied in. One of the 3-man squads was led by one of the sorcerers, one of the big squads was led by one of the sorcerers, and one of the big squads of Death Shroud was led by the Lord of Contagion. Typhus was leading the big squad of the poxwalkers, and of course Mortarion was just floating around doing his thing. The mission was Purge the Foe. Side note, Purge the Foe is my least favorite mission of all time. Whether I win it or whether I lose it, I always find it to just be an intensely annoying mission, and if it goes away I wouldn't be unhappy at all. Deployment was Tipping Point, and the twist was Inspired Leadership, which of course never came up. For deployment, on my left flank, I had the Rogor Dawn and a Chimera. In the middle, I had 2 tank commanders and 2 chimeras, and on the right-hand side, I had 2 chimeras, a tank commander, and also my basilisk on my home objective. From my perspective, the Death Guard had both bloat drones and a unit of cultists on the right flank. They had a unit of Death Shroud, a Predator, the Poxwalker with Typhus, and Mortarion in the middle. And then on the Guard's left flank, they had a big unit of Death Shroud, and they also had a unit of cultists. The Nurglings were Nurgling forward, 2 of the Predators went into reserve, and so did one of the Death Shroud squads, the smaller one. With everything down or in reserve, it was time to see who's going to get that first turn, and I definitely did not want the first turn this time. Really wanted the Death Guard to have to move forward and start doing some things and exposing themselves, then I could shoot them. So naturally, of course, I got the first turn. It's so annoying. I have a really, really bad habit, really bad luck. Whenever I want to go first, I go second. Whenever I want to go second, I go first. I am perpetually damned to an uphill battle in every game of 40k. But there's no point in crying over spilt milk. I've got the first turn, I might as well do something with it. Over on the left-hand side, I push one of my chimeras slightly forward onto the objective, and I cleanse it. I also take chimera and push it into the middle, and I establish locus. Most of my other tanks just stage themselves, ready to jump out on objectives in future turns, or setting up some good firing lanes if the Death Guard decide to poke their head above the parapets. I move forward quite aggressively on the right flank with 2 of my chimeras, trying to put pressure onto the Death Guard early on, and I try and gun down a unit of Nurglings. I think I managed to get them turn 1, but it does take the firepower of both of my chimeras. It was really important that I did try and clear those Nurglings because it would have got me some Purge the Foe points, so that's why I went for it. In an ideal scenario, I would have actually only needed 1 Chimera to clear those Nurglings, and then I could have got a double cleanse off with my Chimeras, but that was not to be. With a lightning fast guard turnover, we head over to the Nurgle boys, and I have to admit, I was expecting Aiden to go kind of balls to the wall here. I've shoved a number of chimeras into his face, and I thought that he might be tempted to move out with his Death Shroud and try and start put pressure on me early on. But he actually plays it quite cagey and quite conservative, which I was not expecting. In fact, the Death Guard turn essentially consists of the Death Shroud on the guard left flank, moving from one ruin to the next, just staging themselves very nicely, and then them destroying one of the chimeras, damaging another one, and the cultists managed to get a charge into the guardsmen that popped out, but they don't kill them, and there's about 5 guardsmen left over at the end of Death Guard turn 1. We go into Imperial Guard turn 2, and I'm in a little bit of a conundrum, because I was kind of hoping that there would be a unit of Death Shroud that I could see this turn, and I'd be able to deep strike down and maybe hit them with Scion Blob. I know that, of course, he has got Overwatch, but it would still have been nice to be able to get one of those Death Shroud units either between my shooting or between my deep striking. As it is, there's not really a good target for my Scions to come against this turn, and so I keep them in reserve. Instead, I bring my Aquilans down. And I and ah about what to do with my Aquilans because I want to try and do damage with them. But at the end of the day, the only target they can really go after is going to be the cultists. I'm not going to do any damage to the predators. And if I come down too near the Death Shroud, they will flame me with their wrist-mounted plague flamers, and 10 Aquilans aren't going to survive that really at all, especially if I come down within 3 inches because I'll be in contagion range. I really want to bring the Aquilans in because I do have behind enemy lines as one of my objectives. I end up coming down against the cultists, staying out of Death Shroud range. I kill the cultists, but the objective's sticky, so really those Aquilans are just there to get me a bit of behind enemy lines. Elsewhere on the battlefield, on the right flank, I take my 5-man unit of guardsmen that had survived contact with the cultists, and I fall back and put them inside the Chimera. There's a Chimera behind them. That Chimera had guardsmen inside it, but I disembarked them first and hid them behind a ruin. Unfortunately, I'm a bit lazy with how I hide them, and as a result, I leave a few lasgun barrels sticking out, and, well, when you're playing against a player of Aiden's caliber, even small mistakes like that can end up having big impacts, as you'll see later on. I also get a little ballsy with my other chimeras because I am aware that Aiden is going to have some deep striking Death Shroud Terminators, and I don't want them to rapid ingress and start messing me up. But here's the thing, I made a mistake here. For some reason I had in my head that he had one of the big squads in reserve, and he actually didn't. He just had one of the small squads. And I really wasn't that bothered about one of the small squads. So I ended up pushing forward a couple of chimeras and getting a little ballsy with them. And really what I should have done is played it a lot cagier. I was overestimating my opponent's reserves, and I was overestimating the durability of those big squads of Death Shroud. Regarding my damage for this turn, I essentially pick up the cultists, and I think I also managed to get one of the bloat drones as well. And I do start laying down some firepower into Mortarion. I don't quite kill him, but I do get him down to 10 wounds. He is a tough beast after all. We go over to the Death Guard turn 2, and it's crunch time. The Death Shroud that have staged behind the ruins on the left come forward and kill one of my chimeras, forcing the guardsmen to disembark. Morty and the other unit Death Shroud and Typhus and the Poxwalkers all barrel into the middle of the board, and then the one unit of Death Shroud that were in reserve come down and they make their charge, and they're able to get into the Chimera on the right hand side. The big thing here though is before they charged, they could see those lasgun barrels with their flamers. And so that Death Shroud unit actually manages to wipe out a unit of 10 guardsmen shooting, and then they charge the Chimera and destroy it. And if you look at where those Death Shroud came in, actually, all of my staging and all of my screening, I should say, try and push them back was pretty meaningless, because they ended up just coming into the one space that realistically they were going to come in on, which was that right-hand flank. So a little bit of a mistake from me. I was definitely over-aggressive. And by the end of turn 2, I am essentially demeched. I've got 1 Chimera left over. And I've got 5 guardsmen that have bowed out of 1 Chimera. I've lost the Chimera in the middle and the guardsmen in the middle there. And I've lost another Chimera. And so really I've got, like 25 regular guards left by the end of turn 2. That's not good. And as I always say, one of the golden rules of playing Mech Guard is if you're still in your Chimeras or got the majority of your infantry left by the end of turn 2, you're in a really good position. If you have lost your Chimeras, you've been demeched by the end of turn 2, it's probably a bad game for you. And as you can see in this case, it's probably a bad game for me. But it's not over yet. After all, the Death Guard are now fully exposed. They're fully in. All of their reserves have been brought in. And now it's time for the Guard to start clapping cheeks, to start throwing the hordes of hell back into the warp from whence they came. Things start off really well with the death of the Demon Primarch, Mordian. You see, one of my tank commanders had died in the Death Guard turn 2. The Predators coming on and like las canning the shit out of it had caused it to be destroyed. But it had managed to shoot back on death against Mordian and taken him down to 7 wounds. I then, in my turn 3, use one of my remaining tank commanders and the Rogal Dawn, and I bring Mordian down. That's always a big morale boost, and it also meant that he would finally not be handing out those rerolls, and also it meant that he would be no longer negating the effects of my Basilisk, because he removes like all modifiers to units around him. I also successfully screen out the Death Shroud on the left flank, although it does cost me 2 units of guardsmen. I move forward with 1 unit to try and move block them, and they flame them. This forces me to get the second unit out. Although again, benefit of hindsight, I think what would have been much better is if I had simply not moved with those guardsmen and just left them where they were, because they were essentially move blocking the Death Shroud already. And all that would have happened is the Death Shroud might have got into one of the Chimeras. I could have driven away. I literally, turn 3, I should have just driven backwards with my Rogal Dawn, driven backwards with my Chimera on the left flank, and just accepted that those 10 guys were going to die, knowing that it was better to have those assets available for turn 4, turn 5. But I'm kind of playing a bit sloppy, and I'm throwing away assets that don't need to. If that's the main takeaway from this game, I am throwing away units when I really should be husbanding them. And a great example of this is what I do with my Scions. Now, initially, I deep strike my Scions down on the right flank, just as an extra layer of screening in front of my tank commander, facing off against a small unit of Death Shroud. And at the last minute, I changed where I want to put them, and I end up putting them on the opponent's objective on the Guard right-hand flank. Now, I do this because I want to take that objective off them, but it's purge the foe. It's bloody purge. So there's literally no point in me doing that. I already control 2 objectives. Maybe it would have stopped Ada from having control more. Maybe. But what I should have done is auto pass morale on my Aquilans and then push the Aquilans onto his home objective. And then that would have stopped that. And my Scions would have been in a much better position. But as it is, I end up deploying my Scions. I break my golden rule. I deploy them away unsupported. I do manage to kill a Death Shroud on that flank. And my thinking is, if any units come after me from the middle, I can do the classic Scion Mega Overwatch and shoot them. But as you'll see, that doesn't quite play out the way it should. You see, in Death Guard turn 3, they move the Poxwalkers towards the Scions. And I'm like, great. I could easily size down Poxwalkers. I unleash my Scion Overwatch, and no word of a lie, I kill the squad down to what feels like, it might be a bit more than this, but it feels like 6 Poxwalkers and Typhus. And I'm like, okay, Like, I can handle that. Even if they come and charge me, I can handle that because all of my Scions have got 2 attacks each. They get rerolls to hit on objectives. I should be able to handle that. And then 10th edition rears its ugly head. Now, I've got no shade being thrown at Aiden here whatsoever. This is definitely a symptom of 10th edition more than anything else. A really, really obscure rule that I've never heard of comes into play, but it absolutely changes the game fundamentally. You see, there's a rule on the Poxwalker datasheet that, on the Poxwalker datasheet, bear in mind, not Typhus's, the Poxwalker datasheet, that says if Typhus uses his mortal wound ability, any casualties from it become Poxwalkers. And so what Aiden does is he gets the mortal wound ability off, he does 6 mortal wounds to my Scions, and he gets 6 Poxwalkers back. Basically doubling the size of the survivors. And then when they charge in, they're able to finish off my remaining Scions. And so what actually happens is, rather than me fighting, holding the objective, because I'm OC2 on all my guys, me holding the Poxwalkers back, maybe tying up Typhus for a turn or so, what's happened is I lose all of my Scions and I basically take out no Poxwalkers, despite the fact that I've spent a CP on Overwatch. And it's just really frustrating, because that's just a classic example of 10th edition having all of these little rules that you can't possibly remember and keep track of. And if I had known about that rule, I'm telling you right now, hand on heart, absolute honesty, if I had known about that rule, I would have put my Scions back where I originally had them, as a screen on my right flank in front of my tank commander, because there's no way that I would have risked those Poxwalkers regrowing in the numbers that they had. But as it was, I've essentially thrown my Scions away. Again, I'm throwing my assets away. I'm throwing my Scions away, and really for no gain whatsoever. And my plan of using the brutal Scion Overwatch has completely boomeranged and basically smashed me in my own face. But it ain't over until it's over. That kind of covers the main parts of round 3 for me, and of course the main parts of round 3 for the Death Guard. So let's go into round 4, and I have a cunning plan. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to drive towards these Death Guard. I realize what I should have been doing from turn 1, and I'm like, I'm just gonna fall back. And I should have done this from the beginning of the game, because like I said, all of the big Death Trial squads were on the board. So really I should just let them come to me and then blasted them. But I had it in my head, there's that big squad in reserve, didn't I? So I should always check what your opponent's actually got in reserve. So turn 4, I basically fall on my vehicles back and just start blasting and blasting and blasting. And this actually puts the Death Guard in a really tricky position, because now they're holding objectives, but I'm basically denying them the purge points for killing stuff. And I'm still getting purge points for holding my home objective. And it actually gets to the end of round 4, and the Death Guard haven't done really any more casualties to me, and I have started to pick up things like the Predators. I've started to lay shots into those Death Shroud. One thing to mention about Death Shroud, I really overestimated their durability. My 50-man Scion squad picked up a 4-man unit of Death Shroud led by a Terminator without even using all the guns. Basically, the plasma did it. And what I realize now, looking back on this, if I had deployed the Scions in the more conservative manner, then they would have been perfectly positioned for turn 4 to go after another unit of Death Shroud. And knowing what I know now, I definitely could have picked up that big Death Shroud squad with them and maybe one tank commander in support. And that would have completely swung the game. But as it is, I don't have my Scions, and so I don't have my rerolls, so I'm blasting into these Death Shroud, but they have, they've got Cloud of Flies and stuff, so it's making it a little bit harder. But we get to the end of round 4, and I'm actually ahead on points, and I'm denying the Death Guard points, and the Death Guard are struggling to get their own points back. All I need to win the game in turn 5 is a couple of secondaries, 8 points on secondaries, and all I need to do is kill 1 unit. If I manage that, I'll win the game. And we actually get to the end of round 4, and Aiden says, I think you've got this game, mate. I think you've got it. I think There was a really like key moment where I denied him like purge the foe points with basically by going to ground on like an infantry squad that had come in as reinforcements, and he couldn't kill them, so he got no purge points. And so he was like, I think you've got the game there, mate. It comes to round 5, I draw 2 secondaries and I can't do either one of them. So I redraw one of the secondaries, and it's storm hostile objective. I'm like, okay, I can storm hostile objective. So what I do is I drive my Rogal Dawn forward onto the objective on the left-hand side, and then I put all of my firepower from 2 tank commanders, from my Basilisk, from my Chimera, into the Death Shroud unit on that flank. Now, bear in mind, this is 1 Death Shroud unit. It's already taken a couple of casualties. All I need to do is kill 4 Death Shroud. That's all I need to do. If I kill 4 Death Shroud, I will kill 1, and Aiden is very unlikely to kill more than 1 himself because of just where things are, so that would mean he wouldn't get kill more. I roll my number of shots on my Demartia cannon. All my random shot weapons basically just roll 1s for the number of shots. It's painful. And I don't have any CP left, because I've used it to like redraw a card. So I only kill like 2 of the Death Shroud. And so what that means is it goes over to Aiden's turn. He is able to kill 1, kill more, because he literally kills 1 guardsman, and that gets him 8 victory points. That gets him 8 victory points. And so the final score of the game ends up being 75 to me and 82 to Aiden. But if I had killed 2 more Death Shroud, all I need to do is kill 2 more. If I had managed that, then it would have been equal kills. Aiden's score would have gone down by 4 points. My score would have gone up by 4 points. And I would have won the game by 1 point. It would have ended 79-78. That's how close this game was. But as it was, I made a few mistakes and I lost the game for it. And truly, I lost the game and Aiden won the game. I don't think Aiden made a single mistake during this. I didn't see any errors. But man, I was playing sloppy. I think I was just a little conscious about playing on live stream. I was wanting to make sure that the viewers that were watching knew what was happening. So I was sort of talking out loud a lot, like my plans and everything. Aiden was as well. We're having a very open game. But I think I was sort of more concentrated on like the show rather than concentrating on the game. And as a result, I definitely threw away assets I didn't need to. And I think the Scion, I could have recovered if I hadn't messed my Scions up. That Scion Deep Strike lost me the game. Simple as that. Simple as that. Because by killing those Scions, I remember Aiden got another round of kill more. So that would have been, if he hadn't killed those, that would have been another 4 points he wouldn't have had. And it would have brought the game back in my favor. So lessons learned here, guys. When playing Purge, don't throw away your assets. Lesson learned here. Keep an eye on what your opponent's actually got in reserve. And lesson learned here. Scions absolutely shred Death Shroud. But with 1 win down and 1 loss down as well, it's time to go into my final game of the tournament. And this time we get a chance to redeem ourselves. Because once again, we fight the forces of Nurgle, the Death Guard. But this time it was going to be Plague Master James who was in command. In his list, he had a Death Guard Sorcerer in Terminator Armor, a Lord of Contagion, and Typhus. There were also 3 squads of Death Guard Cultists, 3 Death Guard Predator Destructors with autocannons and las cannons, and then we had 2 big units of Death Shroud, 3 Fetid Bloat Drones, and then there were 3 War Dog Brigands. And let me just say, even though I played against Chaos factions all 3 games, I absolutely loved every single one of my games. Some of you who have watched my recent tournament after action reports, especially the one when I went to the last GT, know that I've had a bit of a bad run just facing the same factions over and over again at tournaments. So last time I was at Warhammer GT, I faced Chaos Knights 3 times and it was just awful. But this time I faced Death Guard twice, and there is no salt here whatsoever. And that's because both of these Death Guard lists were totally different. One had Knights in it, one had Mortarion, one had 15 Death Shroud, one had 12 Death Shroud. That is a big difference. And then we've got more cultists, we've got more bloat drones in this one. It was actually no problem whatsoever playing against 3 Chaos factions in a row, and actually added to the narrative, sort of the headcanon for myself around this event, where I was thinking, it kind of feels like we're playing against the Black Crusades or something in the sort of Cadian front. It actually was really fun and enjoyable, and I think it goes to show the difference between factions. Some factions you can play again and again and again, and it's always fun. Some factions you play against them again and again and again, and it's the same list every time, and it's just eye-wateringly boring. Long story short, variety is the spice of life. But now let's get into the game itself. The mission was Burden of Trust. The deployment was Sweeping Engagement. And the twist was Hidden Supplies, which is one of the few mission rules that actually has an impact, because this time it meant there were going to be 6 primary objectives, not 5. For deployment, I went for a tank commander and a chimera on my left flank. I went for a tank commander, a basilisk, and a chimera in the middle. And then I somewhat overloaded the right flank. This was mostly because of where the cover was. And I had 2 chimeras and I had 2 tank commanders and the Rogal Dawn on the right flank. For the Death Guard deployment, on the left flank, we had a unit of cultists, one of the big units of Death Shroud, a Predator, 2 bloat drones, and 2 war dogs. Behind the big L-shaped ruin in the middle, we had another bloat drone, another war dog, another predator, another unit of cultists, and the second unit of Death Shroud. And then scuttling over on the right flank, we had a lone predator, and Typhus lone wolfed it, and he went in reserve on his own. With all units present and accounted for, it was time to get into the first turn, and once again, Skinwalker Mordian decided to work his magic, and I got the first turn. And once again, I didn't really want the first turn because my opponent had deployed quite far back with a lot of things, so it meant that line of sight was going to be tricky. But I guess that's the nature of 10th edition. You know, you never want first turn outside of some very exceptional circumstances. And so it was kind of funny. And I did remark about this with my last game opponent, and he thought it was kind of funny as well, that you are doing a roll-off, but to win the roll-off, you want to roll as low as possible. It's almost like, I always say, it feels like it's bad game mechanics if you want to lose the roll-off, but the funny thing is that's the wrong way of looking at it. You want to win the roll-off, but it's lowest number wins. But with the first turn firmly in my sweaty grasp for the 3rd time this tournament, it was time to jump into action. And I had learned from my last game that it was not appropriate to be too ballsy. When playing Death Guard, you've got to play that long game. And so on the left flank, I didn't do anything. On the middle, I didn't do anything. All the action happened over on the right flank. And the big action was I scout moved the Chimera forward, and then I used move to move it really far forward. And then I drew line of sight onto a 10-man unit of cultists that my opponent had tried to scout move behind a ruin just outside of his deployment zone, and I was able to gun them all down. The only other bits worth mentioning is I threw my Rogal Dawn quite far forward because I kind of assumed it would be tough enough. I mean, a Rogal Dawn with Pop Smoke and a 4+ invulnerable save, and I would have enough CP for Armoured Might if I needed it, and I had my ablative plating. I was fairly confident that even if my opponent massed 2 Predators and a War Dog onto it, it would be able to handle it. I finished my turn off by using the Basilisk on the Death Shroud in the middle, essentially cuckolding them and making them very slow and helpless. And then we go over to Death Guard turn 1. Death Guard turn 1 was also surprisingly quick. On the left flank, everything just moved forward. It staged itself behind the big L-shaped ruin, but it's Death Guard, so it's quite slow, so it's not going to start boiling out into the open and then just get shot to death. So my opponent did a good bit of staging on the left flank. On the right flank, couple of predators came out to play and started blasting at my Rogel Dawn, but it weathered the damage fairly effectively. And the only thing to mention is one of the Plague Mowers and also the Death Shroud that I had slowed down charged into my Chimera. They weren't quite able to crack it open in shooting, so they charged into it, and my opponent made a little bit of a boo-boo. He activated his Plague Drone first, which didn't kill the Chimera. And with the benefit of hindsight, what my opponent should have done is activate the Death Shroud first, because they definitely would have killed the Chimera. Then the Bloat Drone could have activated and gone to the guardsmen that had spilled out, and then it could have mowed them down with its big lawnmower thing. So slight mistake in activations from my opponent, and that's not me like lambasting him. He said that out loud as after the combat. He was like, I should have done that in a slightly different order. We move into Imperial Guard turn 2, and I know exactly what I want to do. I need to start carving away assets from my opponent's army. Any unit, no matter what it is, I just want to remove it if I have that opportunity. This is a war of attrition, and I learned from my last game that I don't need to be ballsy. I need to play the long game, and I need to take my opponent's toys away from him, not the other way around. Step 1 of this plan was to deploy the Death Shroud Destroyer 9000, aka the Scion Gigablob. I plopped them in my lines. I didn't throw them off somewhere random. I deployed them as an extra layer of screening, an extra asset on my front line, and I put them into the Death Shroud, and I destroyed them. I absolutely wrecked them. I had learned that Scions are the perfect anti-Death Shroud unit, and every single one of them went down just to the Scion squad. They didn't even need any help from any other units. I then used my tank commander in the middle to go after the Bloat Drone, and I destroyed that. I then used my Rogel Dawn and my tank commander on the right flank. I did have to move both of these units to get this angle, so I wasn't hitting on 4s, but I combined their firepower and I was able to kill one of the War Dog Brigands. It was a bit of a janky angle, but it was totally possible thanks to the extra 3-inch move. And then there was another War Dog Brigand that ended up going down to one of my other tank commanders, and that was on the left hand side. I'm not gonna lie, that was a pretty hefty turn from the guard. Couple of War Dogs down and half the Death Shroud eliminated, plus we've got a unit of cultists and a Bloat Drone in the bank as well. But now it was time for the Death Guard to respond. On the right hand side, the two Predators fire into my tank commander, but thanks to popping smoke, most of their big shots go wide. They also put all of their little shots into my Aquilans, and between that and some cheeky cultists that were hiding behind a ruin, they were able to destroy my Aquilans. They'd come down the previous turn to do a bit of containment. On the left flank, the War Dog moves forward and it fires its Melter Spear into my tank commander, bringing it down to 4 wounds. And it fires its Chain Gun and its Stubber, and there's a few other erroneous spare shots that go into my Scions. And they actually managed to kill them down to just 4 survivors. There is some more scattered firepower from the likes of the remaining Predator and the remaining Bloat Drone that goes into one of my Chimeras, but once the dust had settled, that was kind of it. The Death Guard had a real opportunity to pick up a couple of tank commanders this turn and also remove a lot of my special forces, and it just hadn't quite happened. And now they are fully exposed and I have got my full firepower. Las guns, flamers, heavy bolters, heavy stubbers, plasma cannons, demolisher cannons, pulverizer cannons, auto cannons, oppressor cannons, electronic ball breakers. It was all laid into the Death Guard. And by the end of my turn 3, all they had left was a unit of Death Shroud badly mauled on the left-hand objective and a Predator on that left-hand side as well. Pretty much everything else had been destroyed. There may have been a few isolated scraplets here and there as well, but that hammering was just something the Death Guard could not recover from. And over the course of turn 4 and turn 5, we were actually able to essentially table them. And I think what this game shows is the value of experience. And no, I'm not talking about my experience versus my opponent's experience. That's nothing to do with it. My opponent was a perfectly competent player who played very well, and I don't really see made many mistakes. But it was taking the experience from game number 2 and getting the opportunity to apply it directly into game number 3. And it really gave me that opportunity to reflect. It was like a lightning bulb. A lightning bulb? A lightning bolt. A light bulb, combining two sayings there together, went off in my head. And I realized that pretty much every game where I've lost against Death Guard, I've been too ballsy against them. And pretty much every game where I've won against Death Guard, I've just been really cagey against them and made sure to keep them at arm's length. But the final score for that game was 98 to the Imperial Guard versus 52 to the Death Guard. Another solid victory for the Emperor's true finest. And so, with the final game in the bag, we get to the end of my tournament run, and it is 2 wins and 1 loss. And it was 2 pretty big wins, and it was 1 minor loss. And I just have to say, I really enjoyed the new guard. There were a few things that stood out to me. Tank commanders are really powerful, but they're not actually overpowered. Sure, there were a few times when they spiked hard with those demarch cannons, but for every turn that happened, there was another turn when their reliability just came into question and they rolled badly on the damage or they rolled badly on the number of shots. What I actually found was the greatest strength of the new guard tank commanders and their found squadron ability was just being able to order themselves. It just meant the logistics of the army was so much easier and the mental load of running the army was so much easier. The power was basically the same as any other Russ. It was just easier and smoother. It was just a better experience. I also have a newfound respect for the Death Guard, but I also have learnt not to fear them quite as much. I went into this tournament thinking that Death Guard were absolutely unbeatable and that those Death Shroud were unkillable. But over the course of this tournament, I killed plenty of them. I wiped out basically 2 6-man squads in that last game, and I was able to wipe out about 7 or 8 of them in the second game as well. They are tough, but they do go down. For the Guard, the best way of dealing with them is the Scions. If you've got Basilisk, it is good, but when Mortarian's around, he kind of neuters your Basilisk a little bit. So I think going forward for a lot of Guard players, a Scion Gigablob is going to be mandatory as we enter this Death Shroud meta. And finally, I am firmly in that Met Guard camp. Chimeras are just really good. The ability for them to deal with infantry, but then they're actually tough enough that your opponent has to dedicate some proper firepower to kill them, but then they can still punch up into enemy vehicles, was present and prevalent in pretty much every single one of my games. If I had swapped my Chimeras out for blobs of infantry, I don't think I would have done as well at this tournament. Well, at least that's what I think. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. What do you think I could have done differently, both in my games and with my list? And what were your takeaways from this video? On top of this, have you been playing Guard competitively since the balanced data slate? What has been your experience of the faction with these changes we've had recently? As always, don't forget to let me know what other armies you want me to take to tournaments. And if you enjoyed the video, smash that like button and subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.